Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for April 11, 2016. We'll begin with a special order calendar, decision items. Item number 1, 38280BZ, 316, 318 East 91st Street, Manhattan.
Okay, they revised the plans and provided a cover letter. The cover letter states that a stair lift from grade to the theater seating will be provided, but then I looked everywhere on the plans and I couldn't find one, so I don't understand what was submitted. Maybe it was a mistake, the wrong set of drawings, but we need to see that.
We need a drawing with showing a stair lift?
The drawing needed to show them doing it. They did, as requested, provide a letter from the fire alarm inspection company and a copy of the 2013 PA permit for 360 persons. I'd like to just hear finally that the fire department is okay with this application. They could send us an email. We don't need to, because the hearing is closed. I just want to hear that it was. So if they could get us the drawings right now, we can vote tomorrow, otherwise we have to postpone. Anybody else? Okay.
Item number 2, 227-10BZ, 204-12 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, as we requested, they relocated the above-ground waste oil tank to that area that's enclosed where the trash is. That's still up against residential property, but at least it's a little more confined because it's up against the building in sort of a corner. What I was thinking was that because the Auburndale Association specifically asked that it not be located near residential, and this is still closer to the residential property line, I was thinking that we might have a condition where we said that if the location of the trash and the waste oil tank storage becomes a nuisance to the neighbor, that they would then build a brick enclosure around that spot there and then enclose it. I mean, I know that the waste oil probably has to have, they both need circulation, but they could do it with like some kind of an open brick system, something like that.
How would we find out if
That's if so that would be a condition that, let's say, the community board would get a copy of our resolution, and so they could be aware that if there's any kind of a nuisance, or maybe Auburndale, because otherwise we can't, if we make them, we can make them do it now, I suppose. It's another approach. Thoughts?
I'm just concerned about the way we will be enforcing that,
So the only way that things like this are enforced is if it's a condition and it turns out to be a nuisance, then the neighbor can actually say, go to the community board, and the community board can say to us, tell us that they need a compliance here. And we could have them do it in the future. Otherwise, we can just say, it's a problem right now, and they should just build a brick enclosure.
I'd rather do that.
Rather do that, okay.
So real.
Yeah.
Item number 3, 87-12BZ, 1720, 1728 Sheepshead Bay Road, Brooklyn.
We do have fire department sign off. We have a letter that clarifies what the hours of operation are, except that I know there's a mistake in the letter. It says Monday to Thursday, 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. They mean p.m. So I hope council can figure that out. But they also provided what were, I found, often illegible photographs, but nevertheless, of the fire alarms and the sprinklers. So as far as I'm concerned, it's okay, but we need to have something, maybe if we could get it right away, a revision on the letter, because the problem is council uses the letter to write the resolution, and it'll have the wrong hours.
Okay.
Okay.
You email me? Email Carlo?
I sent it in already.
Oh, you did to Carlo? Okay.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Item number 4, 313-12BZ, 1009 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
This one has the same comments. The hours of operation were provided in the letter, but there's an error in that 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. So we need that submitted immediately. And we do have fire department sign off, and they provided photographs, though hard to see, of the fire alarms and sprinklers.
Continued hearing items. Item number 5, 19649BZ, 1280 Allerton Avenue, the Bronx.
They submitted photos of the site cleaned up of trash and graffiti. The clothing bin looks like it was removed. They provided revised drawings showing 6 parking spaces for the vehicles awaiting service, and they revised the signage drawings. They didn't address the relocation of the tire rack storage, or the tire storage rack. That's on the property line, and it's not shown on the plans at all, even though it's right up against a number of those parking spaces. I'm just wondering why the rack can't be moved to up against the building in adjacent to parking space number 1 that's extra wide. And that would be behind the trash bin. And then we had talked in a prior hearing about improving the landscaping buffering, which on the drawings or on a prior approval had these little planter boxes that have withered vines. I think we had talked about there's a concrete walk and why that couldn't be turned into a buffer zone for the residential that's adjacent. You have this quizzical look on your face.
I know, because I read an adjournment request for this.
So did I.
and So that's
You
why I don't
did?
understand.
Yes,
Oh.
they requested an adjournment.
There's an
And,
adjournment
but then they must have
April to
submitted
the beginning
something.
of May.
They must have submitted something, because it sounds like you were looking at
Right,
something
but it's a
new,
February 8th submission that you all are referring to.
which is
Really?
before the last hearing.
Yeah.
Confused. I don't know, we need clarification. I don't know, I didn't see the adjournment request.
It's not dated. It just says adjournment
But
in
there
the
was-
file,
Sure,
but
it's
there's
not
no
the 2
date.
23.
No, I'm positive, because when you open the letter, it says exactly the dates, and it says we're adjourning
I'll
April
check that.
12th
I didn't
until
find it.
May.
All right, we'll check that out.
Yeah.
Move on.
So I'm just gonna write with a question. I'm not sure why this would be adjourned. Like, why do they need to adjourn? Okay.
All right. New cases, item number 6, 25389BZ, 405 411 East 73rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay. We didn't have really a lot of comments, but just a couple here. So I'd like to know, in the statement of facts, there's a statement that's repeated several times that says, the existing floor slabs between the columns on these floors were previously included in floor area calculations. I don't understand what they mean. Existing floor slabs between the columns were included in floor area calculations. Aren't they supposed to be included? I don't understand what that sentence refers to. And then with respect to the rooftop mechanical waiver, I actually don't understand what the scope of the waiver is, because it'd be confusing to me why DOB would consider the entire mechanical system out of compliance if it was installed pursuant to permits prior to the zoning text change. And then I went online and I could see there were alteration type 2 permits for new dunnage under a generator and a new cooling tower, and to combine the heat and power plant. Those are all issued in 2013. The text was adopted in 2012. So presumably, they got permits. DOB found them compliant with the regulations, presumably, right? So I don't understand why we're being asked to effectively legalize the entire roof. And I also don't know what the scope of the issue is, because they didn't do any drawings to show us how it complies or doesn't comply with the aggregate widths or the percentages or anything like
Right, I
that.
thought they could give us as-of-right plans,
Yeah.
or, show where it's non-compliant with shading or something.
Well, what they could do is tell us what the dates of installation of each of those pieces of equipment are, so that we would know what's a pre-2012 installation versus post, and which ones were issued pursuant to permit, because I assume that they filed drawings in order to get permits.
I took it as if it was the replacement of the 2 existing units, put them in some way over in terms of the text. So it wasn't that the entire roof mechanicals were in jeopardy, it was just that
Just those 2.
these 2 units were not going to be compliant. But it's worth them explaining exactly what they meant.
But that's the thing, without calculations to show what puts it over, like over by how much, where, whatever.
How much of a waiver is needed?
Exactly, because we can't just sort of generally waive, and maybe there's a way to relocate some of these things anyhow, right? Did anybody have any other comments about this? No? I thought it was...
That issue covered my issue.
Okay. Anybody else?
No,
I thought it was a really well-organized application,
Absolutely.
easy to understand. Okay, thanks.
Item number 7, 20205BZ, 11-11, 131st Street, Queens.
Okay, this one, we still need Department of Investigation and Fire Department sign off. The Department of Health has been looking at modification requests to the systems. We need to get a sign off from DOH. I would like to have them detail how each condition in the prior approvals has been met. Instead of just listing what the conditions were and saying, yes, met, I'd like to understand how met, because, for example, the hours of operation in the approvals were very specific as to activities, and they weren't a blanket 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. operation. It says, for example, bath and locker room area, 6 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week, no admission after 10 p.m., restaurants and pools, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., etc. That's what it says in the resolution, and that wasn't addressed at all. Also, the rooftop parking approval was for a maximum of 36 cars with a maximum of 140 spaces in total, 52 spaces on each of the enclosed parking floors below. The statement of fact states that there are 42 spaces on the roof without any explanation. It's like you approved 36, but here's 42, and it doesn't admit that that's out of compliance. Also, the resolution referred to required screening on the rooftop, and I don't know how that was accomplished. I don't know if they think of that as the railings, or it wasn't clear in the drawings or anything what screening was supposed to be. And then I'd like them to clarify in the statement of facts that the parking is valet and not self-park, even though the drawings say it. I'd also like them to provide, with respect to the issues that have made the news and the Department of Health is involved in, a site safety plan that addresses those concerns, so an inside and outside site safety plan, to provide information on the current parking conditions at the site and information on the screening and lighting around the third floor open pool area. There's also, I understand that there's a compactor, kind of generally I understand that on site, but it's not clear that there is. I don't know where it is, because it says that refuse pickup is only on Friday, and I'm trying to imagine with that kind of level of operation, and they serve food and everything else, there's only one pickup day. Also, they're proposing to relocate the trash containers, or they already did, at the property perimeter. I'd like them to discuss that and the impacts on the adjoining properties. And then the letter from the owner states that the hours of operation are proposed to be reduced, that instead of 6 a.m. it's 8 a.m. To improve safety. I'm not really sure why that improves safety, but the statement of facts didn't address it, so I'm not really sure what that's about. Anybody else?
Yeah, I had a question about, it seemed that a loading dock has disappeared from the first floor. Previously, I think they had one on the first floor and the mezzanine level. Now it looks like it's just a mezzanine, and I'm wondering, do they need it? And if they do, where did it go? Also, could they speak a little bit about the sort of expansion of the program for the building? Because now they've got this restaurant, it seems pretty large. It used to be sort of in an open space. They had a snack area, and they have 3 liquor licenses on it that are registered to this property. So we'd like to know exactly how the operation has changed, especially with liquor being involved, and according to their website, one can order a drink while you're in the pool.
Nice.
So,
How about while you're in the spa?
that too. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that. And then they still have some open ECB violations for their elevator, one for energy benchmarking, which is not so bad, but if they have elevator violations, I'd like to know what the elevators, where they are, how they're used. And there seem to be additional massage rooms at the mezzanine level. And where did the mechanical spaces go that used to occupy those areas? So does that increase their occupancy, and does it have any impact on
In the parking area, if you see the site, there is on the first level a lot of debris stored. You can kind of see it through the wall because the wall has kind of got holes, perforated. And I was wondering what that's in reference to, and is that why they had to shift those parking spaces up to the roof? Because they don't have space.
Okay. That's the lower parking level, right?
Yes, it appears to be the lower parking level.
Anyone else? Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items, 17415A through 17615A, Johnson Street and Mila Way, Staten Island.
Okay, they provided the revised site plan showing the placement of no parking, stop, and right turn only signs on Mila, Johnson, and Industrial Loop. And they added certain notes that meet the fire department's requirements. I just want to hear from the fire department via the email that they're fully signed off on this. We have a February 22nd fire department approved drawing set. And Industrial and Mila are both shown now at 40 feet wide, curb to curb. So I just want to make sure that nothing happened between February 22nd and now, or the fire department might have different thoughts. It's just hard to know whether we're all in the same exact place.
And then they had submitted, revised the plan because initially DOT, fire department was okay, and then there was a condition about DOT.
Right.
DOT then submitted an email saying that they
They're
were not concerned with, they're okay with BSA and fire department
Putting signs,
restricting,
yeah.
restricting parking.
Right.
So then the fire department took a look at that plan, and then, I'm not going to put an updated plan, stamped the plan from fire department.
There's a 222 stamped fire department plan. If
Okay.
that's the latest one, then we're good. I just want to make
And
sure
then,
it's the latest one.
John, that was the, then Phil Rampola submitted, made their latest submission. Okay, I'll double check
Right.
that for you.
Okay. And DOT will be putting their own signs up on Industrial Loop because they're in control of that as well. Not Industrial Loop, no.
Johnson Street?
Johnson.
They'll put it on Johnson because that's theirs, whereas Mila and Industrial are private.
Right.
Okay.
Item number 9, 26215A, 64 Sharrett Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, so one of the concerns we had about this was that there was a jog in the sidewalk. They did revise a plan to move, but they ended up moving the jog down, basically. I understand why they wanted to retain this one pretty wide tree. It's 48-inch caliber maple. So you don't really want to cut it down just to keep the, so I get that. So there's kind of no way to avoid a jog in the sidewalk, it seems to me.
They just moved it into the driveway.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a better layout, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's one less jog before you jog twice. So now you jog once. And then the plans were revised as requested by the fire department to show that the hydrant is within 100 feet of the Siamese connection. So I think we're good, right? Okay.
New cases, item number 10, 162, 164, 15A, 139, 48, 88th Road, Queens, and on number 11, 165, 166, 15A, 88, 30, 88, 34, 88, 36, 38, 144th Street, Queens.
Okay, we still need a community board recommendation for both of those. So, let's see. With this one, what's strange about this application is that it's been almost 10 years since a stitch of work was done on the property. And I understand the idea of common law vesting, but what I don't understand is how long does the common law right last when it wasn't a significant amount of work that was done towards the project? I mean, it was 12% or something like that. And then it sits there for 10 years untouched. And so what I would like is that the applicant brief us on the law pertaining to very long delays in common law vested rights cases where there's been no progress made since the time of the rezoning. And I know that the BSA in 2009 granted them the 2-year extension, but that's a completely different set of facts because that's a statutorily based extension and it's not that long after the rezoning. And for whatever reason, they didn't come back for their second bite at another 2 years. And so that's another question. They really, I don't know if this is where it applies of sitting on your rights, but they sat for a long time. And, if I think about the community is now used to the current zoning. And so kind of all of a sudden, these projects that don't comply will go up. But the thing is, in terms of what's sympathetic about the cases, is that these are extremely unusual sites, and I don't think you could actually build them under the current zoning. So they might, not that you would want to do this, but they might qualify for a variance because they're such strange little sites. And I don't know whether you would get the same thing through a variance as you do through the vesting. But one thing that I wanted to correct is that the concrete analysis shows that 100% of the concrete was poured, but there's no slabs on grade poured, so that's not 100%. So that's not correct unless they were covered with earth, which makes no sense. And I'm just wondering, shouldn't there be, this is a question for Commissioner Montanez, shouldn't there be samples taken of the concrete to determine whether it's still able to, I know it's
I'm not sure what
wood
DOB
frame.
requires. They usually take samples when they pour the concrete. But the
something-
concrete generally does not deteriorate.
It doesn't even expose like that for 10 years? Nothing happens to it?
No.
Wow.
It's a very durable material. Sometimes it gets better. Age.
Those Romans were pretty smart.
They were. Maybe they could provide us with some sort of schedule and proof of ability to move forward.
And I thought that they should revise their cost to complete because I
Yes,
don't
oh,
think
right.
it's really realistic anymore.
It seems like there was some ownership change of
Yes.
ownership, and we need to understand that and as to if that was the reason why there was no work that happened. I mean, it was, just don't know. I mean, those things need to be cleared. And the other thing was that in the statement, the applicant compared it to an R5 as of right development, though I think the site would qualify for an R5 infill, which allows a higher FAR than an R5. So, I mean, not that it's going to change any of the hardship factor, there still would be, but I think it would make sense to have it revised to reflect what is feasible and then base it on that, the difference.
Okay.
And I think we definitely need to know the project timeline and are there any cost outline that they have, any commitments and contractors lined up. I think we definitely need to make sure they're ready to hit the ground and build that.
So to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay. But could you clarify, so we know that the property was purchased recently by a new owner, right?
It was purchased from a bank.
From a bank, right.
foreclosure
It
process.
was a
Sale,
foreclosure.
right?
It was a
In
short sale.
2015 from the
Yeah.
bank, right? So it was, I mean, it was clearly what, and I think it was in the stalled sites program too. Is that right? Is that something?
I know, Josh was gonna check that.
Okay,
Josh Weinstein.
but we know 2007 was a bad time to start a construction project, so a lot of that is kind of expected, but the fact that it kept enduring, all the other projects are finished now that were in those
Right.
stalled site stages. People took advantage of the boom, and now who knows, right? So, okay.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 12, 3114BZ, 165 Spencer Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, well, we're still waiting for DEP air toxicity analysis. It's actually a big deal, what they're finding, so we need them to keep up doing what they're doing.
Item number 13, 23114BZ, 124 West 23rd Street, Manhattan.
We received a letter on March 23rd from the building's representative, it's like the tenant representative or owner representative, stating that there have been incidents maybe coming from the gym since the last hearing. They don't ask that we hold off on the decision, however, only that we grant based on a short leash, which I think seems reasonable given the level of litigation and upset that this gym has caused. So I'd recommend that we consider this for like a one-year term, and then a renewal would be contingent on no complaints from neighbors and and that the renewal hearing would require full notification of the neighbors prior to the hearing, which normally wouldn't be required. Any comments on that?
Item number 7, 17715BZ, 432 Alburn Avenue, Staten Island.
We have a March 28th DEC freshwater wetlands permit. I find always with these permits, they don't refer the set of drawings that they approved, so there's no way to know that those drawings and this permit have anything to do with each other. I don't know how we get them to make it clearer. But we had asked also that the statement of facts be corrected, and that wasn't provided. That was a problem because there were a lot of incorrect references to the zoning resolution and incorrect yard assumptions. I also still see problems with the as-of-right assumptions about the required front and side yard depths and the proper zoning resolution citations. All that proper stuff is needed in order for our council to be able to draft the resolution. Otherwise, it makes reference to all the wrong things, and then that's a problem when you bring the resolution to the Department of Buildings, it says all the wrong things. So what I'd suggest in terms of getting this done, there was an odd zoning calculation sheet provided that had no zoning calculations on it, that just basically said the zoning district, the lot area, the total, and it didn't tell you, it didn't do any calculations. What there really should be is a plan that is the zoning sheet that shows, makes reference to all of the sections in the zoning resolution that are applicable, and then shows whether they comply or whether they don't. And that way we would be in the same place, on the right page. So I think we need that before we can vote, because at the moment I'm not sure what we're waiving. I know we're waiving yards. That's so far all I know. I don't know if they're 10-foot yards or 20-foot yards. Anybody else?
Well, I think they were trying to get the DEC approval permit modified because it still says a one-family.
One-family.
So they have to get that changed to say a two-family.
But the 328 doesn't say one family?
No, it says one family.
Oh, and they needed to
And
change
we're
it to
approving a
two. Right.
two-family.
It still says two family?
It says
Still
one
says
family.
DEC
Well, I mean,
still
it
says
still does
one.
one.
Yes.
Okay, so that still needs to be,
So then you don't need them.
still says. Okay.
So do you still need plans?
Yeah, so they need to provide a revised, they need to
Permit.
provide zoning calculations plan, a plan that shows the zoning calculations in the zoning sections. They need to get the DEC permit corrected, and as long as they're doing it, if DEC could please refer to the drawings that they looked at, because there's no way for us to know. And maybe that's part of the problem. They were looking at another set of drawings where they didn't see that there is that little apartment on the first floor.
I think they referred to drawings of a certain date, and then the applicant gave us DEC plans that have a certain date on them. So the assumption is that we're talking about the same set of plans, but they don't physically stamp them.
Yeah, that's.
Which would be nice.
Yeah, it would be great if DEC would stamp some drawings. Anyway, okay.
So soon we're going to reopen this.
What?
We're going to reopen this, or?
Well, it's just
We don't, it's closed, we were waiting for those submissions. So it doesn't need to be reopened, it just needs to be submitted.
Okay.
And we didn't get that.
Continued hearing items, item number 15, 33013BZ, 2801 Brown Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this tiny little, very problematic project. So this is now an application both under 73-622 special permit and section 6492 special permit, and appendix 64-A80 to allow an increase in floor area and to legalize the unpermitted obstruction in the required 10-foot rear yard that we cannot waive under 73-622. That's why they had to bring in another special permit. Let me just jump to the main issue here. I said, sorry. Yeah, so the main issue is that I don't see that we have the authority under 64A20 to grant under 73-622, because 64, if the building was lifted pursuant to 64A20, which allows the lifting of an existing structure that existed in October of 2012, as of the date of Sandy. All you have to do is prove that it existed in whatever form, illegal or otherwise. If it was lifted under that or reconstructed under that, then it's specific to 64A20 and A30, enlargement pursuant to 73-622 is prohibited. And this is a legalization, so all the work was already done. but they're coming here now for an enlargement under 73-622, and I don't see how we have the authority at all to do it. So that's the first problem. If I just go talking about some of the other issues, in order for me to understand how zoning resolution 64-92 special permit might apply here, I need to understand better the sequencing of the construction on the site for which permits were issued for the building that we see today. What was the sequencing? For instance, did the rear yard extension at the first floor exist to the same height as it's now proposed? Did it exist on October 28, 2012? In approving the application in 2013, DOB did approve an application. DOB appears to have accepted the legalization. That's what it actually says on the, I think it's the PW1. It says legalization accepted. And so does that mean they treated it as one of these lifts under 64A30 or A20 as a legalization? And the approved plans also show the first floor built full to the rear lot line. In that, the plans that DOP approved in 2013. But the second floor was pulled back on all sides. So the second floor was a fully complying second floor that was filed with DOB. And then the owner went ahead and built this completely illegal structure, right? So what I'd like to know is whether there is now an issue about the DOB, about whether DOB should have accepted the first floor full yard incursion as a legalization. I mean, is what DOB saying that was a mistake? They shouldn't have accepted that? I don't understand the sequence of when that full first floor was constructed. Like
The Sanborns show in 2007 that it's only about a third of the building.
Which is, right. So that other infill was either built illegally prior to 2012, October 2012, like they filled it in, and then, or they filed drawings showing that it existed, and therefore they could lift the building. So it's not clear to me what DOB saw, thought, what's going on. And then with respect to the, go ahead.
I would have thought that they had to submit a survey to DOB to reconstruct the building on the original footprint.
Right.
So they should be able to produce that survey to us.
Right, but I think in 2012, or pursuant to 64A30 or A20, you didn't have to show a survey, you could show an aerial photograph. So if they had built illegally, subsequent to the 2007 Sanborn map, and they could show DOB that it existed like that, then that would have been considered the existing condition, because DOB, for all these sandy affected buildings, wasn't getting into forcing everybody to provide a pre-sandy survey.
Okay.
So but I don't know whether it was built after or before. So, and with respect to the second floor, I also wanted to understand, so what they explained in the statement of facts is that DOB approved this structure, but the attic was converted to a mezzanine. So that'd be different if DOB had approved the envelope and the mezzanine was inserted in there, but that's not what the drawings seem to indicate. So it's not a conversion of an attic to a mezzanine. It seems like they built it out further than what was approved in the drawings, not just inserted an extra floor, right?
Well, they said that the owner decided to do that.
Well, whoever.
So,
The owner doesn't build it, a contractor builds it, somebody draws it.
well, they're kind of saying DOB didn't approve that.
Right, but it's like, they said it was converted. That sounds like the attic's already there, and then the contractor says, hey, you know what? This could be a floor. Why should you have this be an attic? we'll just put a bathroom up there, you know? So that's not, so then with respect to the 6492 special permit findings, I don't understand how complying with the flood-resistant construction findings and the second floor rear yard and incursion are interdependent. That's actually one of the requirements, that complying with the flood regulations leads to an appropriate building. That doesn't permit you to arrive at an appropriate building, whatever appropriate means. But I don't see how building in the rear yard has anything to do with that. Normally, the lift causes some kind of a non-compliance. So you need the waivers because the lift did, like the typical ones are like the staircase that we've seen on the Build It Back projects. The staircase is now in a required yard or something like that. Google Earth maybe. Oh yeah, so then the other thing is, in terms of the request also, the Sanborn map of course doesn't show, the 2007 Sanborn map doesn't show that rear yard incursion, so it's not it's not a pre-existing condition as far as Sanborn's concerned, but it does show that there are many of these tiny little 20 by 45 lots, and the Sanborn map doesn't show any of the other houses having that same kind of incursion that's built full to the rear lot line, which I find concerning because, I mean, we saw it during Sandy, you know, the burning down of an entire neighborhood because the houses are so close to each other. So what I'd like to know is from a perspective of what's going on in the rear, whether there are other houses that have done that kind of illegal build-out, which makes it essentially characteristic of the neighborhood. I'm not sure that we can even look at this issue, but I'm not comfortable with the request even, because you're building right to the lot line, and I don't find that safe. And then just one other thing, with respect to the 73-622 findings, which again, I don't really think we're going to be able to use here. We had asked for clarification that this was an actual lift as opposed to a tear down. The architect's letter is difficult to understand, but it seems to be saying that there were no existing walls lifted, but that the so-called slab was lifted, which sounds extremely unlikely. Lastly, well, with respect to the permitted obstruction of the eaves, they incorrectly cite to the section that permits obstruction by eaves, the open space where yard rule says that a projection is the lesser of 16 inches or 20% of the width of the yard. So there are these 24-inch side yards, so 20% of that is only 5 inches of permitted overhang, not 12, so the eaves are non-complying. And that's all I have. Anybody else?
Well, just regarding the construction of the cellar, the architect says that they're going to put concrete blocks between the wood beams, and then he gives a sketch which doesn't show any wood beams. And I'm not really sure what he's showing there, but he includes bat insulation and gypsum board on the inside, which are not water-resistant construction materials, so I still don't think he's complying with Appendix G. This is for anything below the design flood elevation.
Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 16, 200-14 BZ, 4605 Parsons Boulevard, Queens.
They asked to adjourn this.
They did?
So?
Yeah, they're gonna ask to
I'm
adjourn.
sorry.
Did you guys review this? I thought.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's what I said.
We had asked that the materials not even be put into SharePoint. I'm sorry. It got in there. Yeah. Okay. The front desk was very efficient despite our best efforts.
So we're not going to discuss it at all?
No, because unfortunately, they didn't respond to most of our requests for information, so they're going to, I think we're just going to adjourn it for a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, till the next hearing.
We'll put it
So all
on for
is
the
not lost, you
26th.
will
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, we'll try to
And hopefully
get
they
it back
will
quickly.
provide us with the rest
Yeah.
of the answers. And ideally, we will hear from the architect directly and hopefully a representative from the mosque. That's the plan. That's the plan. That's the great desire. Okay.
Item number 17, 11-15 BZ, 155 Dover Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this one they did ask to adjourn. Have me back.
Yes, adjourn, sorry. Item number 18, 6715 BZ, 338 West 23rd Street, Manhattan.
All right, we still don't have the community board recommendations. Did you see it?
They did
thought community
vote.
board
They
said-
rejected it. They denied it.
No, they approved with condition.
I thought they denied.
Okay.
Well, they
We
said
need to check
unless,
that.
they denied it unless 5 conditions were met. I guess that's the
And the
same
5
thing as
conditions?
approved with conditions.
It's a long list.
It's a long list,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Why did I- okay. All
I think
right.
the most of the concerns was with the noise coming from the rear yard and how to control that and ensure that that would only be used for resident uses and not for pre or post gathering or during intermission of the
Did they
program.
indicate that that happens?
Yes, and that they want the rear doors and the windows to be closed during performances. It looks like it's a lot of noise complaints from neighbors.
And they want their security staff to have cell phones that the neighbors will have numbers to, so if there's a problem occurring, they can contact them immediately. And that they also enforce the same conditions on their rental, rental people, whatever, whoever rents the place.
The.
Of course, they put it out for
theater
rent.
rental. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I mean, they recognize that that space can be used for private uses and it's very difficult to monitor that, but at least.
Because the owner who was here represented that the backyard was only used by him. Him, owner, occupant of the apartment above.
Right.
Which is not the case.
The neighbors have a different
Take.
Well, I guess that was in the past, they said, but that they changed their operation, that it used to be perhaps used for aggregating.
Okay.
I was wondering if the fire department had
Oh, yeah.
inspected the site.
No, the fire department said that they were going to go in and look, and they said they were going to get an assembly unit inspection team out to inspect, and I don't know if they've had time. They said they need a PA permit for the audience area. And then they were also going to take a look at the sprinklering conditions. The drawings do show sprinklering in certain areas, so the fire department should look at the drawings to make sure the sprinklering indications are correct, and whether the sprinklering currently, because really we should get this done now, right? If it's possible. This is legalization, so I'm not sure whether they'll be able to get their permit now. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. New cases, zoning calendar, item number 1, 15814 BZ, 1179 East 27th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. Okay, then, so this one, with respect to the rear yard, there's a proposal to reduce it to 20 feet for the full height of the building. The house to the immediate rear received a special permit for 20 feet, and I can see from the photographs towers over this house, but the houses to all the other sides have complying rear yards. I think the design needs to address this kind of disparate impact. the rear yard immediately behind versus the houses to the side. I do want to say that the photograph of the house to the rear is proof to me that these kinds of houses have enormous impact on the character of the neighborhood, and you can't necessarily tell that when you're looking at drawings, but when the house is finally built, you can see what it does to an adjoining property. So I think that this new house needs to be responsive to that reality. The elevations show also penetration of the sky exposure plane. I don't know if there's a dormer rule that applies here, and if that's what they're doing, they need to explain this or correct. The house also, as proposed, is significantly taller than the adjoining houses, so they should bring the height down or justify with more information about other houses on the social block. They provided information on only one taller house on the block. That doesn't make neighborhood character, that's one. Maybe there are others, I don't know. I couldn't tell from the submissions.
We have a lot of area in the attic
Yeah.
that seems to be
Yeah.
exposed.
Yeah.
So I think that there's, bring it down.
Yeah. Anybody else?
All of their dimensions need to be revised because it's typically done, like the front yard is 9.3 feet, and they're using that as 9 feet 3 inches. And it's the same for all the dimensions. And they say they have a 1 foot 7 inch side yard, but the survey says it's 0.9, and when you go to the site, you can actually see the rear yard fence jut out. It looks like about a foot. So I've just questioned the dimensions of the house, everything, all their dimensions.
Wow. So it's check the dimensions on the drawings against the
Survey, and do the proper conversion, and check the dimension of, I forget if it's the north or the south. One of the side yards does not look to be 1 foot 7 inches, it looks less. The survey says it's 0.9.
Okay.
One of the things in the neighborhood context-wise, as you mentioned, they have a very uniform front yard. And the proposal here does extend into the front yard. That would kind of take that alignment out. I think all of them seem to maintain a 7 foot wide front yard. Effort should be made to kind of retain that as much as possible. And I mean, it's a similar context. And again, I have the same comment on the attic thing. It's not being used. It's really like a huge attic that's being designed more for a, seems like a more for an emphasis of the design part of it, but if it's not being used, the height can easily be brought down and it can be moved back, like the attic floor in the front can be brought down and it can be set back even more to reduce that vertical extension appearance that's not there in that neighborhood complex.
Okay.
I had a general question. Now, this building has a side yard on one of the, like one side yard is complying on the one to the left-hand side. I don't have the north arrow or the south arrow, so to know which one. The existing, it's not like the existing side yard is, on that portion is 1 foot, as 1 foot 7. I mean, most of it is 5 foot 7 inches. There's a small portion of it that is 1 foot 7. And the question is, to what extent do we accept the lowest dimension, which is really the smallest portion of the dimension, as, and that's the question I just had.
So I have been struggling with this on a number of these applications where I don't think that when it's, I forget what here, it's like 14 feet or something like that. It's 14 foot wide, 4 foot deep on that, for 2 stories, and that side yard is reduced, right? And I don't think when you look at the length of the building's 57 feet, I don't think you should be allowed to count that 14 foot wide thing as the side yard. However, the board has been has considered these very narrow extensions, especially when They are floor area, not at all when they're bay windows. But when they're-
Or an entrance that looks like it had been modified or enclosed.
Right.
Like this is on the whole block, all the houses are similar.
Yeah.
Okay.
That it's an enclosed side entrance and it's 2 stories.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So in
so-
this case, it's kind of
Yeah.
uniform.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it personally. I think what it does is it reduces the level of protection, because, the reason that you have space between houses is to prevent fire spread. So it's one thing if you've got a house that's built consistently all the way, but in this case, what you're doing is encouraging that reduction on your fire spread separation, and I personally don't think it's the right way to go, but that's the way the board has behaved, so until we get further, let's say, support from city planning. Okay.
Item number 2, 18114 BZ, 670 92nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. So this one, we need a community board recommendation, right? Okay. Just saying, the statement of facts never actually states clearly what zoning district the building is in. You can figure it out if you keep reading somewhere, but it doesn't offer you that right up front in this statement of fact. With respect to the A finding, the applicant is urging us to apply the Cornell case to this after-school program. It cites to many cases that it claims are similar to this case, but does it without the rigor necessary for us to ascertain whether those cases and their specific facts are applicable in this case. For example, it cites to a recent BSA decision on the Alvin Ailey Dance Center, but neglects completely to mention that programs in Alvin Ailey are directly associated with degree-granting programs in other institutions. Those were the specific facts that had the Cornell deference apply. With respect to teaching hospitals also, the applicant also fails to mention that the medical schools with which these institutions are affiliated train medical students in the hospitals using faculty from the educational institutions. In the case of another recent BSA decision on Settlement House, the applicant demonstrated and took great care to demonstrate that its facilities provide essential daytime school functions to the local public schools. So, if the applicant really proposes to have the BSA expand, which is what it's trying to do, the Cornell doctrine further to apply to after-school programs such as this one, it'll have to do a much more careful and persuasive job of it and dig deeper into case law than it has done. So far, if you ask, I mean, it's just logical, this case is more like South Queens Boys and Girls Club, which was decided in 2009, which decided that the club is not entitled to deference, much more than it is resembling Cornell. So consequently, the A finding should focus on the form of the zoning lot and whether it is unique. With respect to uniqueness, I need to understand more about why the 25 lots that are shallower than this one would not also be entitled to variances, and especially since all of them are narrower than this one. So I'm kind of like, oh, okay, so all those other 25 get one too. So how is this different? With respect to the programmatic needs analysis, I kind of understood how the school works, but the charts that were provided to explain how those classrooms are used didn't help at all. They actually found them very confusing. I mean, it was like some kind of strange scorecard. A weekly chart should be all of the hours of the day, and every classroom numbered and keyed against some drawings so we know which classroom is which, and then what classes are held in each room, how many students. It should include the adult classes as well, because that way we understand which parts are for kids and which parts are for adults, and that the place doesn't have more classrooms than it really needs to have. And then with respect to building height, there's no mention in the statement of facts that it is effectively 5 stories, not 4, due to the trellis with the solar panels above it. So it's over 60 feet high from grade, which is almost 2 times the allowable. They should provide dimensions to the top of the panels, which were not provided, and should show sky exposure plane and side yard setback outlines on the drawings. Statement of fact states that the cellar slab cannot be lowered without requiring increased foundation depth, but the section shows the slab's been lowered, so I don't get that. And they need to show the finished floor to ceiling heights on the sections and show the trellis and solar panels on the sections. And there was no section BB provided that shows the rear yard setback at the 4th floor. And then since we're talking about why the lot is unique, they talk about the shallowness of the lot. So when you think of a shallow lot, what's the typical relief that you would get for a shallow lot? You'd get yard waivers or coverage waivers, right? That wouldn't account for why you should get a floor area waiver, for example, because now you can use all your floor area right there on the lot because we're waiving the yard regulations. Also, had there been development in the side yard, the building height would have been lowered. So I'm not sure exactly how sympathetic we should be to the absence of taking advantage of the side yards. So I think they need to make a better case for that. Like what's the impact on the neighborhood to maintain those 8-foot side yards, that kind of thing. The neighborhood character study provided in the statement of facts was very clear, but should have included the heights of the buildings it proposes we consider in support of the height of this building. The findings also didn't go through the need for each waiver. It needs to systematically go through. Here's a waiver we need, this is why we need it, this is how it meets our program. Let's see, so the plan at the 4th floor shows a full height wall around the setback level at the rear. That's not correct. It should be a low parapet with a railing the way it's shown in the elevation. And also, if I'm just looking at the impact on the residential neighbor to that rear, and I think, and looking at the size of that classroom that's taking advantage of that little extra sort of dog leg, it seems to me that you could pull back at the 3rd floor also, and then you'd have still a functioning classroom with, I think it's 13 students, and you wouldn't have so much of an effect on the neighbor. That would be a complying rear yard from the 3rd floor up. Then the finished material at the rear and sides of the exterior is shown as Ephes, like one of the worst materials ever invented. It's very easily damaged. I was actually reading to see if Ephes has improved, and I went online to find a building inspection site who talks about when you're buying a home and it's covered in Ephes, here are the issues that you should worry about, because it's not a breathable material, so the rot begins on the inside and it's way too late by the time you see it revealing on the outside. So that should be a different material. With respect to the parking waiver, which it really doesn't discuss at all in the findings, it does discuss it in the statement of facts. And I do understand the comparison to a school for kids who don't drive obviously shouldn't be valued the same way and analyzed the same way as a community facility where people are driving. However, there was no study provided, and it's a significant waiver. And also, it admits that some huge percentage of parents are dropping the kids off from school. So because this is an after-school program, and a significant number of the kids come from Staten Island, I'm assuming that the parents do not go home to come back for 2 hours later after class is over. They hang out. Where do they hang out? Where do they park? And I'm assuming there are other areas also that they're coming from, not just Staten Island, where it wouldn't make sense to go home and deal with traffic and then come back. So that needs to be addressed. And also, participants in the adult program have been completely ignored. So I would think that probably during the day, there are more classes for adults. And how do they arrive? And where do they park? And then, okay, those were my questions. Others?
I had very similar questions. I was very confused as to exactly sort of how many kids were going to be participating and how they're participating and how many classrooms they actually need at one time. It seemed to me from reading the papers that they're sort of not necessarily all there at the same time. They kind of shift. So do they actually need as many classrooms as they're talking about? Because it appears that there will be some classrooms that would be empty during the course of the 2 hours that the school is sort of actually, or the center is actually open. So that was confusing to me. Also, the parking waiver also confused me because they don't talk about adults actually coming to the center and how they use it. They don't talk about parents dropping kids off. Where are those parents going to stay for a couple of hours while their kids are being instructed? Plus, they have an auditorium. So I'm assuming that they're going to have some kind of shows or productions, and that means that every parent is probably coming with their child by car. So, what happens and why aren't they providing some kind of parking someplace? It also occurred to me that, they're talking about it's an expense to expand into the side yards. But if they were only going to take out, let's say, the stairwells from, sort of this core area, put those in the side yards, they probably would gain enough space to accommodate a lot of the things that they're sort of asking for in terms of that vestibule in the front yard. They could probably now have room to kind of push some things back. Also have space for that small office that's on the first floor. They could put that sort of in the main building. So I wasn't really convinced that the side yards couldn't be used in some way. Also, it was unclear to me, the incremental costs for expanding into the side yard. They gave us sort of very rudimentary kind of budget and the cost, but it just didn't seem to correlate with anything that I was kind of looking at on the plan. So they need to clarify that. And would there be an impact indeed on the neighborhood if they utilize those side yards? I'm not sure that it would be a big impact because they're next door to a medical facility that probably isn't going to be harmed by use of at least one side yard. And can they justify the floor-to-floor heights? It seems that they have some pretty significant floor heights, so I'd like to know why. And the elevator proposal doesn't look like it really works very well on the lower level of the cellar. At the auditorium level, it empties into this sort of small area instead of servicing a more larger lobby area. So I think they could look at their circulation a bit, and they might be able to derive maybe more classroom space if they kind of look at their circulation pattern. I think that was it for me.
I had questions about their programmatic needs, because it seems like their programmatic needs is greatly stressing simultaneous space occupation. And it seems to me that, they're basing their whole argument on the fact that the as-of-right has 5 classrooms and a multi-purpose room, and that's not enough to educate 175 and eventually 335 people simultaneously. However, when you see the charts, there is no simultaneous use of that degree. In fact, there's only a small portion of young people who come in the afternoon unless it's on a Friday or a Saturday. And so I don't really feel that they've made their case that the as of right doesn't work. let alone whether or not the lesser variance is precedent.
I agree that I think they're overreaching in terms of their request based on their stated programmatic needs. They have 14 classrooms. I guess they're stating that people who are on different levels of Greek education can't be in the same class, but are there really 14 levels of Greek education? And, why do they need 14 classes? And it doesn't seem to me that they need the size of the classes that they're asking for. So I didn't understand that. As far as the front yard waiver, they just have this little jut out for a vestibule in the front yard, which doesn't go up to a second floor. I don't see the need for that. And I think it might even be able to either reduce or eliminate their lot coverage waiver. So I didn't see the need for that. They're asking for a vault under the sidewalk, which would remove any trees that are there. And yet they have this Department of Parks note on every single plan sheet, even on the roof plan, which I didn't understand. Why is this Department of Parks notation so important? So if they could explain that. They also have a large laundry room in the cellar, how does teaching Greek relate to having a large laundry room? I didn't see that. And again, they didn't do an on-street parking survey. It seemed to me that parking was rather tight in the area. They didn't explain whether the solar panels are permitted obstructions on the roof. And I guess the only deference issue they could have is universal PK if it's licensed.
Yeah, but
That's two classes.
Two classes, yeah.
Right. And I wasn't even certain how many students they were going to have in the universal pre-K, because the room occupancy seemed to be higher than what they said they were going to do and what's actually permitted, which I think is a maximum of 14 students in a room. So there's a lot of holes.
And I'm not clear about it, but I'm assuming pre-K cannot be used for any other programming. It would have to be a set-aside.
I don't know if that's really true. I don't know why you can't move the toys and whatever and then use it for
So if
evening
that's the case, then I
classes,
think
right.
I definitely would like the applicant to consider how that could be used for non-pre-K period, because on weekends, there aren't going to be pre-K programs, at least from the list that's been provided. So that could address some of those class needs. And I think all of you have raised the same questions and concerns I had. I definitely, the bulk of the building, of the physical design, the rendering of the building, maybe they should provide a better one, because it's not very flattering, it's not appealing, it's too massive. I understand there is a medical facility diagonally across, and but the residential buildings are setbacks, and they are much lower in height. And if this building is proposing a taller building, I think the massing has to be addressed in some ways that is a little bit more respectful of the character of that street frontage, and not just rely on the hospital facility, which is much further down. I mean, not much, I mean diagonally. And I don't think, again, the travel modes and other things have been clearly specified. And the statement says, well, kids don't drive, so we don't need to factor the mode of transportation, but as you all mentioned, they need to clarify. So I think the programmatic need is definitely not clearly laid out in my mind to justify this variance.
Just to clarify, we need a traffic and a parking study.
Yes.
So even though it's not triggered by the EAS, by threshold on the EAS, we need that for this waiver.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it was not that easy to find parking along that. So, and if they're going to drop off, pick up,
Right.
there needs to be some way of providing that space in front for that without having it affect any of the vehicular movement, especially I think the ambulance entrance to the hospital is right off that street, so you want to ensure that the traffic pattern is as clear as possible to allow for those emergency exits and entries.
I have a further question about the pre-K. Are they operating the pre-K school, or is this another,
And
are they bringing somebody else in?
I thought they were going to open,
Because
that's, it wasn't clear.
Your
but the-
question was interesting to me about why can't they utilize the pre-K rooms, or are they utilizing pre-K rooms after sort of the school hours? And it just
Right.
occurred to me that maybe it's actually another operation, because it actually would work, it kind of looks like it could be a separate operation, and that's why they didn't use it. So I would like to know how exactly they administering this.
And I don't know what, we can find that out from the Board of Ed or Bureau of Health, Board of Health, what the rules are about using UPK classrooms for other purposes. Child care services. Okay. Thank you.
Item number 3, 33114 BC, 2171 Ocean Parkway, Brooklyn.
Okay, with this one, just to get to the threshold question, I see only one wall being retained. So I'd like to know how it's proposed to retain the existing floor area to constitute an enlargement. The section shows that only the first floor joists are being retained. That's not sufficient to be an existing building. On the site plan, I need to show dimensions from the rear yard of adjacent structures and their heights. So the idea is to be able to say how far back the structures that are adjacent are from the rear lot line, and then how high they are, 1 story or 2 stories, so then you can say what's the neighborhood character at the rear. The minimum combined side yard width in an R5 for a 26-foot wide property is 8 foot 4 inches. The proposal reduces that to 7 foot 8 inches, so that's not allowed. So they need to increase that side yard width on the wider side to 6 feet. The community board, I noticed, had a concern about the driveway. I'm not sure what that was. I would like the applicant to discuss that. With respect to the rear yard depth proposed at 20 feet, I see that the figure ground map shows that there are some other houses adjacent with 25-foot and 24-foot rear yards, but the diagram doesn't show the number of stories at those levels. It's the same issue. That should be provided. This site is extremely deep at 130 feet, so really shouldn't need this kind of a rear yard waiver compared to many of the other sites we've seen that are similar width, but are only 100-foot depth. So I'm not really sure why such a waiver is needed here. The plans show it can handle being cut back to meet the rear wall of the neighbors, and I think it should. In addition, the proposal is for a full 3-story house, so it's not even one of those 2-story but sort of attic versions. It's a full 3 stories. I think they need to demonstrate that that's consistent with neighborhood character and should not depend on an occasional anomaly. The building immediately adjacent that they seem to be using as their role model was illegally built. It has an open ECB violation since 2009 that specifically refers to zoning violations. You can't use an illegal construction as your neighborhood model. 2161 Ocean Parkway, which is a few doors down, has a recent stop work order. It's not really clear for what, but the zoning diagram is available online, and it shows that the building has a required rear yard and was built as of right, but I don't know how it was built as of right, because it's very clear what the enlargement is and what's new, what's existing, and it had non-complying side yards. So it sounds like it was also built illegally, but because I think it was self-certified. And so you can't use that either as your model if it's an illegal construction. There is also a full lot depth cellar, which we've seen recently. DOB has not permitted, and I don't know why you would need this in the first place. Like, what in the world is going on in that gigantically long cellar? Other comments?
I think there's only one BSA grant on this block that's allowing for 20 feet. So he talks about these various other buildings that have less than 30-foot rear yards. And so he either needs to justify that these are legal conditions, or I don't think he should be using a legal condition as justification for a 20-foot rear yard. So he needs to do something with that. And indeed, that southeast wall should be, I guess, brought in a bit so that they have the 8-foot between the building. And he's only like less than a foot off, so he should bring that in. And I didn't think there was enough of the existing foundation actually kept, much less first floor joists. So I think they need to justify the foundation as well. Other than that was it.
Anyone else?
I'd like them to tell us what the height of the garage entrance is, because it's sort of like a stepped cellar, and it just seems to me that it's not very deep at the entrance. So if they could explain that.
So is it like it's too steep to get in with the car, or?
No, I guess they're reducing the slope so that it complies with 11%, but then it looks to me that I'm not sure they have enough clearance to get like an SUV in the garage. I'd like to know what the clearance is at the doorway. And if they need the 6 feet, then I guess they're not using the minimum, the narrow lot. If they're using the narrow lot zoning regulation, they have to show, 1961 separate ownership.
Right. I think they did provide it.
They did? I didn't see that.
Yeah. I think they did, because I started in with that too, and then I saw there was a deed. Or in any event, a Sanborn.
And just if they could do the landscaping calculations and show compliance.
Just the rendering of the rear, it seems the third floor bedrooms. Oh, okay, no, it does match. Only there are windows in the rear yard from the second floor.
Got them?
Okay, no, because the rendering of the rear yard, rear elevation looked like there was only windows on the second floor and none on the third floor. But it matches with the plan, which is kind of odd.
I often find the fenestration on these houses odd. It's like the windows are facing the side yard and not the rear. I never understand that.
There is a entrance on the third floor.
Huh?
White no windows.
Yeah, and also there's this double height living room.
Right.
Not sure if providing a room above that would reduce some of the bulk in the rear. Those are,
Yes.
There are 2 staircases.
yes, there are 2 staircases.
Their
I'm not-
core is pretty big.
right next to each other, so it's not even sure what it's serving.
Right. There's a lot of extra stuff that could be modified or improved to reduce the massing, because this is a really gigantic house using an illegal house as its role model. So, never a good thing. Okay.
Next one. Item number 4, 3415 BZ, 2316 Ocean Parkway, Brooklyn.
Okay. The statement of facts is internally inconsistent about the floor area increase. So it goes from 0.95 to 1.05 or something like that. Needs to be corrected. The rear yard study is also practically illegible, but we also need heights of the adjoining rear yard incursions. I went on to Oasis and found my own rear yard study, and when you provide it, please make sure you can read the thing when you submit. The statement of fact states that there is no Sanborn map proof of the existing conditions. That's kind of a correct statement, but it makes it sound like there were no Sanborn maps available for the site, when in fact they provided a lot of Sanborn maps for the site. All of which show no side yard incursion on that side lot line. So I don't think no matter what you argue about the age, the apparent age of the brick or whatever, we can't consider an extension of that zero lot line that's proposed, which in any event I don't think is appropriate for similar reasons that we discussed before, since it's just a very short incursion compared to the overall length of the building, and the width of the lot has plenty of development opportunity. So it's not like this is a tiny little 20-foot wide lot. So with respect to that existing incursion, I would say leave that up to DOB to decide whether it can stay, and put a note on the drawings that says DOB to determine whether that's an pre-existing condition. For similar reasons, I don't see any reason to decrease the depth of the already non-complying rear yard, since there's so much room to grow this project in the side yard and somewhat in the front yard up to that 30-foot setback. The house is much wider, though, at the end of all this. The house is much wider than its immediate neighbors, so I think they need to demonstrate that the frontage of this width comports with neighborhood character. It's an extremely unusual site of being this double wide, so kind of travel around the neighborhood and look for other examples of wide houses. Also, they need to show compliance with each of the Ocean Parkway regulations. I don't see any notations about planting and permitted obstructions in the front yard and those kinds of things. I like them to verify that the site is not in the AE flood zone. I went on to that Find Your BFE site, and the site falls just on the border of the AE zone. So I think one of those preliminary firm maps should be provided, and the location shown on the drawing. The owners of this house should probably be made aware that they're right on the edge. They may want to voluntarily lift. And they should also need to provide a roof plan and clarify the interior portions of the attic that are not floor area, because the drawing makes it look like the only constructed portion of the attic is the area that's the attic, that's occupiable, but in fact the attic is huge because the roof is huge. So that's not an accurate representation of that level. Anybody else?
I wasn't sure whether they included the greenhouse in their floor area calculations. I don't think they do.
They dotted in on the drawing, but I don't think that they did it.
Yeah, I don't think they
it counts
do.
as floor area, right. Anything else? Okay.
This concludes the public review session for April 11, 2016. Mike's off?
Yep.